The first rays of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of amber and rose. Mist clung to the valley floor, wrapping the endless fields in a silver veil. Willow Creek lay silent, save for the distant rustle of leaves and the low hum of awakening life. On the Bennett farm, time moved to its own rhythm, a world shaped by seasons, sweat, and unspoken promises. Generations had worked this soil, bending their backs beneath the weight of the sun, tethered to the land as though it were part of their very blood. Caleb Bennett, 32 and weathered by years of labor, belonged to this land more than he belonged to people. His hands were calloused, his frame solid, and his gaze carried the stillness of someone accustomed to solitude. Beneath the surface of that rough exterior lingered an emptiness he rarely acknowledged, a hollow space carved by years of silence and routine. He trusted the earth. It never lied, never betrayed. But people? They brought nothing but complications. That morning should have been like any other. Caleb walked toward the river with an armful of laundry, his boots leaving heavy prints in the damp soil. The river wasn't just water to him, it was history. His mother had once knelt there, scrubbing clothes while singing softly under the summer sun. After her passing, the duty fell to him, though he despised the chore. Still, tradition was tradition. But today, something was different. He froze mid-step, eyes narrowing as he spotted a figure crouched by the water's edge. A woman, young, unfamiliar, kneeling in the shallows with her skirts gathered loosely, humming a tune too delicate for this rugged land. Sunlight kissed the loose strands of chestnut hair slipping from her braid, turning them into glints of fire. She didn't belong here. That much was certain, and yet, the sight of her sent an unexpected jolt through him. "What are you doing on my land?" His voice broke the morning stillness, deep and edged with warning. The woman startled, nearly dropping the shirt in her hands. Wide hazel eyes turned to him, uncertain, like a deer poised to flee. I didn't know this was private property," she stammered, her accent soft, unfamiliar. "The river looked clean. I just needed water to wash. I'm sorry if I—" "This stretch belongs to the Bennetts," Caleb cut in, his jaw tightening. "Folks don't wander here unless they're lost." She bit her lip, then straightened slightly, defiance flickering in her gaze. "Then maybe I am lost." The answer caught him off guard. Most people avoided challenging him. Caleb's reputation for being short-tempered was well known. Yet this stranger didn't back down. Her clothes were plain but neat, her hands marked by work, though there was a quiet grace in the way she moved. Whoever she wasn't from Willow Creek. "What's your name?" he asked at last. "Evelyn," she said softly, wringing out the fabric in her hands. "Evelyn Hart." Silence settled between them, broken only by the murmur of the river. Caleb wanted to tell her to leave, to keep his world untouched by whatever trouble she carried with her. But something in her eyes, something fragile and unspoken, held him still. "I don't like strangers on my land," he muttered finally, though the edge in his voice had dulled. "But you can finish what you started." Her brows lifted in surprise, but she nodded. "Thank you." He grunted, setting his own bundle of laundry nearby and knelt a few feet away. They worked quietly, each focused on their own task, though both acutely aware of the other's presence. The river, once a backdrop to routine, now felt like the beginning of something he couldn't name. As the sun climbed higher, casting golden ripples across the water, Caleb realized with a strange unease that the course of his life had shifted. He told himself it was nothing, that letting her stay was simple courtesy. But when he carried the clean clothes back to the farmhouse, the weight in his chest said otherwise. Evelyn wasn't meant to stay. And yet, the very next morning, she was there again. "You're back," he said gruffly, dropping his laundry by the bank. She looked up and smiled faintly. "I told you, I might be lost. Lost people don't find their way overnight." For 3 mornings straight, she returned, sometimes silent, sometimes humming, sometimes asking about the valley. Caleb answered little, but he listened. Her voice carried a tired sweetness, like someone who had known both struggle and grace. But in town, whispers began. At the tavern, a man leaned over his drink. "Seen that girl by the river? Says she's passing through. Nobody knows where she's from." Another smirked. Pretty thing, though. Wouldn't mind her washing at my place. Caleb's jaw clenched. His reputation kept most men from pushing too far, but their words lingered like smoke in his lungs. Evelyn wasn't theirs to talk about. She wasn't anyone's. The next day, at the river, she was quieter than usual. Her hands slowed, her gaze drifting toward the shadowed forest beyond the water. Caleb noticed. "What's on your mind?" he asked, his voice softer than before. Evelyn hesitated, then let out a long breath. "You're not the first to ask where I came from," Evelyn said softly, her voice carrying a weight that made Caleb pause. "And I doubt you'll be the last. But the truth is..." She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the damp cloth as though anchoring herself. "I don't want to go back." The last word fractured, breaking into a whisper. Caleb turned, studying her more closely. There was something raw in the way she held herself, a strength built over wounds no one could see. His question came rough and unvarnished. "Did someone hurt you?" Her eyes flickered toward the water, the river's shimmer reflecting against hazel depths clouded with secrets. "Not like you're thinking," she murmured. "But pain doesn't always come with bruises." The admission tightened something deep in his chest. He wanted to ask more, peel back the layers. But Caleb Bennett wasn't a man who pried into ghosts. He had his own. Instead, after a long silence, he spoke low. "The farm's big. If you need somewhere to stay, there's room. I don't make this offer lightly, but if you're running from something, you can stop here." Evelyn's head snapped up, eyes widening in surprise. For a heartbeat, she seemed ready to refuse, then her expression softened. "I'll help," she whispered. "With the washing, the chores, whatever you need. I don't take kindness for free." Caleb nodded once, but inside, unease coiled like a restless horse. He hadn't meant to say that. He hadn't meant to care. And yet, when Evelyn gave him a small, almost timid smile, it felt like the first crack in walls he thought would never fall. That night, long after the lamps burned out, Caleb stood by the upstairs window, staring across the moonlit fields. Something had shifted, something nameless and terrifying, because Caleb Bennett had sworn long ago to keep the world at arm's length. And Evelyn Hart, the stranger by the river, was already too close. The days slipped into weeks. What began as intrusion became routine. Evelyn moved through the farmhouse like a quiet melody, soft, unassuming, yet impossible to ignore. She rose early, worked hard, and left traces of life where there had been none. A vase of wildflowers on the table, bread baking in the oven, the faint hum of her voice drifting through the open windows. Caleb noticed. He noticed everything. And though he told himself he allowed her to stay because she pulled her weight, deep down, he knew better. The farm no longer felt hollow. It felt alive. And he hadn't realized how much he craved that until now. Still, questions lingered like shadows. Who was Evelyn Hart? What storms had driven her this far from home? One evening, those shadows deepened. A storm rolled over Willow Creek, splitting the sky with lightning and pounding rain against the farmhouse walls. Caleb sat near the fire, repairing a worn leather harness, when Evelyn appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a thin shawl. Her face was pale, eyes glistening in the flickering firelight. "You all right?" Caleb asked, setting his tools aside. "I've never liked storms," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "They remind me of things I'd rather forget." He studied her, the flames dancing across her face, illuminating something fragile behind the strength she wore like armor. "You don't have to tell me," he said quietly, "but hiding from it won't make it disappear." Her lips curved in a bitter half-smile. "And what about you, Caleb Bennett?" Her eyes locked with his, sharp and unyielding. "What ghosts are you running from?" The question struck like a blade. Caleb opened his mouth, then shut it again. No one in town dared ask him that, not since tragedy had carved silence into his bones. But Evelyn had asked without fear, as if she saw straight through the barricades he'd built. "Some things," he said finally, his voice low and rough, "are better left buried." Her gaze lingered on him, searching for answers he wouldn't give, before drifting back to the storm. Later, when the thunder faded to a distant growl, Caleb found himself standing at her door. He didn't knock, he only listened to the muffled sobs pressing against the quiet, and something inside him twisted, sharp and merciless. Caleb Bennett could face failing crops, sick cattle, and debt looming over his shoulders. But not this, not the sound of Evelyn Hart breaking in the dark. The next morning, she was all brightness and calm, humming as she kneaded dough in the kitchen as though the night before had never happened. For a moment, Caleb almost believed it, but the tremor in her hands told another story. And then, at the river, she asked, "Do you think a person can start over completely?" Her voice was quiet, urgent. "Leave everything behind and never look back?" Caleb rinsed the fabric in his hands, the cool water running over his fingers. "If anyone knows about leaving things behind..." He paused, meeting her gaze. "It's me, but no matter how far you run, the past has a way of catching up." Her jaw tightened. Fear and defiance warred in her eyes. "Then I'll run faster." Before he could answer, movement caught his eye. A lone rider on the ridge above them. A man, watching. His hat shadowed his face, but even from a distance, Caleb saw the way the stranger's gaze locked on Evelyn like a predator scenting prey. Her breath hitched, color drained from her cheeks, and then, without a word, the rider turned his horse and vanished over the hill. But the damage was done. Evelyn's hands shook violently as she clutched the wet cloth to her chest. "Who was that?" Caleb's voice was hard, cutting through the river's whisper. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Tears welled in her eyes as she turned away, and in that single moment, Caleb knew what he had been denying since the day they met. Evelyn Hart wasn't simply lost. She was running from someone who had finally found her. The days that followed weighed heavy, pressing silence into every corner of the farmhouse. Evelyn worked with relentless energy, her fingers blistered from scrubbing, her body bent over chores as if she could outrun fear by sheer will. She smiled when Caleb looked at her, but the smiles never touched her eyes. And Caleb saw. He saw the way she stiffened at the sound of hoofbeats, the way she lingered by the windows at night, eyes scanning the darkness, and he hated it. Hated the fear that had stolen the fragile sense of peace she'd found here. Finally, one evening, his patience broke. Who was he? His tone was calm, but it carried the weight of iron. Evelyn set down the pail in her hands, her shoulders rigid. For a long moment, silence stretched like wire between them. Then, in a voice barely more than a breath, she said, "My past." They sat by the fire that night, the storm of truth crackling louder than any thunder outside. Evelyn's hands twisted in her lap, her voice trembling as she spoke. "I wasn't born Evelyn Hart," she confessed. "That name, it's mine now. But it wasn't the one I grew up with. My father, he was powerful, wealthy, ruthless, and he promised me." Her breath faltered. "Promised me to a man I didn't love, a man who wanted more than me. He wanted the fortune tied to my family name." Caleb's jaw clenched, fury flashing hot through his veins. He'd seen men treat women like cattle before, but this was different. This was personal. "So you ran," he said, his voice sharp as steel. She nodded, tears glistening in the firelight. "I thought if I came far enough, made myself small enough, they'd stop looking. But that man on the horse..." Her voice cracked. "I know him. He works for the one I left behind. And now they know where I am." Her shoulders shook and she pressed her hands against her face. "He'll come for me, Caleb. He'll take me back." Caleb reached forward, his rough palm covering her trembling hands. She flinched, then stilled, eyes lifting to his. "No one," he said, his voice low and carved from stone, "is taking you from this farm. Not while I'm breathing." Evelyn's breath caught, a flicker of something, hope, fragile and bright, sparking behind her fear. But even as the promise settled between them, the valley whispered, carrying news faster than wind. And at the tavern a few nights later, Caleb heard the first rumors stirring like smoke. Whispers of trouble drifted through the saloon like smoke. "They say there's a stranger in town," one man muttered over his whiskey. "Asking questions, looking for a woman, red hair, pays good money." Another smirked. "If she's hiding, won't be for long. Gold makes tongues wag." Caleb didn't wait to hear more. He left before rage burned a hole through him. By the time he reached the farm, night had fallen, and the moon spilled silver across the river where Evelyn stood. She turned as he approached, sorrow in her eyes. "I can't stay, Caleb," she whispered, voice trembling but firm. His chest tightened. "Don't say that. If I remain, I'll bring danger to you, your land, your life. I can't let that happen." He stepped closer, the river rushing between them. "And where will you go? Back to the man hunting you?" Her lips parted, but no sound came. Caleb's voice dropped, raw and urgent. "You don't understand, Evelyn. Since the day you walked out of those woods, I can't imagine this place without you. If you go, the silence comes back, and I—" His words faltered, heavy with everything he'd never said aloud. Tears glimmered in her eyes. "And if I stay, you could lose everything." Before he could answer, the night shattered with the sharp crack of a branch in the woods. Evelyn flinched, clutching Caleb's arm. "Show yourself," Caleb roared, his voice echoing into the darkness. No reply, just shadows shifting like ghosts among the trees. He dragged her back to the farmhouse, bolted the door, lit the lantern. Evelyn trembled, pale as ivory. "It's him, Caleb. He's here." Caleb knelt before her, gripping her shoulders. "Look at me. Whoever's out there isn't taking you. Not from me, not ever." Her voice cracked. "Why risk your life for me?" He swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. "Because somewhere along the way, you stopped being a stranger. You became mine." The confession hung between them like thunder before the storm. Evelyn's breath hitched, but before she could answer, 3 heavy knocks shook the door. Caleb opened it a sliver, rifle ready. A tall man stood outside, rain dripping from his hat, smile curling like a snake. "Evening, Bennett," he drawled. "I'm looking for someone. Red hair, hazel eyes, calls herself Evelyn." Caleb's voice turned cold steel. "You're trespassing." The man chuckled. "Not after land, just the woman. She belongs to Mr. Blackwell, and he always gets what's his." Behind Caleb, Evelyn gasped. The man's smile widened. "Ah, so she's here." Caleb stepped into the doorway, blocking the view. "Turn your horse around before this becomes something you regret." The stranger tipped his hat, eyes glinting. "We'll be back." Then he vanished into the storm, hooves pounding like war drums. The days that followed were a blur of fear and fire. Caleb reinforced the doors, checked his father's rifles, rode the fences with a grimness Evelyn had never seen. At sunset one evening, smoke rose from the barn. By the time they reached it, flames devoured the structure. Caleb fought until his arms bled, but the barn fell to ashes. It wasn't an accident. "They'll burn it all," Evelyn whispered, clinging to him, "until I have no choice but to go back." Caleb's eyes burned hotter than the flames. "No, they made their mistake. They brought war to my land, and I'll bury them before I let them take you." When the riders came, night swallowed the valley whole. Torches flickered like devil's eyes. Their leader dismounted, grinning beneath his brim. "Bennett," he called, voice dripping venom. "Hand her over, and maybe we'll leave your house standing." Caleb stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. Evelyn gripped the railing, heart pounding like thunder. "You'll leave now," Caleb said, calm and deadly, "or you'll fertilize my fields." Laughter. Then steel flashed. Gunfire erupted. Bullets shattered wood, sparks flying like fireflies. Caleb dropped one rider, but another lunged, knife gleaming. Caleb struggled, pinned against the railing. Evelyn's eyes locked on the revolver beneath the cabinet. Her hands shook as she loaded it. But when she stepped outside, something fierce ignited in her chest. Bang! The man dropped at Caleb's feet. Smoke curled from the barrel in her hands as silence smothered the chaos. For the first time, Evelyn wasn't just running, she was fighting. The leader spat on the ground. "This ain't over. Blackwell himself will come next." They rode off into the darkness, leaving blood and broken boards behind. Caleb caught Evelyn as the gun slipped from her trembling fingers. He pulled her close, his voice a rough whisper in her hair. "You saved me." "No," she choked out. "You saved me first." Weeks later, the barn was gone, scars etched deep into the land. But for the first time, Caleb didn't carry the weight alone. Evelyn worked beside him, her laughter returning like sunlight after storm. One evening, as the river glowed with the last fire of the sunset, Caleb took her hand. "This land has seen enough loss," he said softly. "It's time it saw love." Tears filled her eyes, but this time they weren't born of fear. And there, by the river where everything began, a rugged farmer and a runaway heart finally believed in a future neither had dared to dream.